about astrology. It's not going to be a particularly deep dive. It would take at least hours and days. Like, have you guys ever listened to the astrology podcast? Like, every episode is over an hour. Some of them are like 3 hours long. It is a big topic, y'all. But we're just going to go over the basics today for beginners. Why do people believe in astrology? This seems like outrageous. Like, how could anybody be born a month apart but still have the same personality? I put my own time of birth in and realized there was a lot more to astrology than just like what day you were born. So today I just want to also discuss that we will not be talking about horoscopes. Horoscopes are based on transits, a future interpretation. It's not anything to do with your personality. It is close enough for a beginner especially to consider natal astrology to be psychological or personality astrology. According to the AFA, which is the American Federation of Astrologers, usually the creation, or I guess the discovery, is usually credited to the Babylonians. It started as a way for them to track seasons and years, and eventually they started using it to do things like predict the weather, natural disasters. Eventually kings started using it. You know, they had astrologers on their council who would give them advice as to like when it was favorable to go to war or to do certain things. And so eventually, though, astrology became valuable to more than just the kings of the world. And now, of course, today astrology is available to anyone. In the 4th century BC, it was introduced to the Greeks. After that, Plato and Aristotle, thanks to them, it became well received. It was looked at as a serious science. Up until about 2,000 years ago, astrology and astronomy were actually the same science, but eventually they found a need to deviate. My assumption, especially in the tropical zodiac, is that because we don't actually use the constellations are not necessarily the same as the zodiacs. My guess is that's why they had to deviate. Eventually, the Romans began to use it, and even to this day, we do use a lot of the Roman names. The Google definition of astrology is the study of the movements and relative positions of celestial bodies interpreted as having an influence on human affairs and the natural world. So we need to write a letter to Google and say, hey, half your definition is not correct. I do want to point out the word relative, right? It's relative from this planet to that planet, this planet to Earth, that planet to you, the viewer. That could be miscommunicated, especially to people who are not familiar with astrology. Some people might actually think that it's just close-ish, but it's not. That's not the case. The part that I disagree with is interpreted as having an influence on human affairs and the natural world, and that's just not accurate. 99, I would guess, percentage of astrologers do not believe that. Maren Altman has a really great analogy. She always says, the clock doesn't make it 3 o'clock. The clock just tells you, hey, it's 3 o'clock. So if you have anything to do at 3 o'clock, now's the time for you to do it. That's really what astrology is. Now, the key word here really is interpret, which would lead you to believe that it's not that this is written in stone and has to happen. This energy is present, and do with it what you will. You can use it in a good way, or you can use it in a way that's not that valuable. Just for your entertainment, I will read off some of the branches of astrology. I'm not even going to read them all, but I'm just going to kind of bring some to your attention. There's natal astrology, predictive astrology, which horoscopes, relationship astrology, electional astrology is trying to find the best time to do things, horary astrology, which is this astrology associated with asking and answering a question, mundane astrology is countries and governments. I think this isn't exactly a branch or a type of astrology, but it's called rectification, and that is actually a tool in case that maybe you don't know or there's no way for you to figure out what your birth time is. There are even more. Some of them are just like smaller versions of these. Like, for example, there's psychological, which is definitely a part of natal astrology, and there's financial, which would be part of electional astrology. One of the main questions that people who are new to astrology ask is astrology a science? And usually, in order to be a science, it has to be reputable? Nope. Repetitive. Able to be repeated? Is that what repetitive means? I know what repetitive means, but is that a proper usage of that word? It may not fall into that category. So the AFA does ask a good question. If it didn't work, then would it still be around? I mean, would it have spread? If it didn't work, it would just be a footnote in the history books. Maren Altman also had I'm going to talk about her probably a lot. I think it was in her video about free will versus destiny. When we have all the information, then maybe we'll see how it's a science. If we had all of the asteroids available available and could understand all of the different relationships, maybe then we'd be able to say that it is a science. Seems like maybe that's a bit of a distance away, but it could happen in the future. If the planets don't affect us, then what is astrology and how does it work? You know, why are there other planets? Why are there stars that are just like our suns? Why are there galaxies outside of our own? It doesn't really make any sense that the laws of the universe would have only humans at the forefront. It's sort of a very human-centric opinion that astrology affects humans. I think more so it's likely that the universe and time itself, time and energy, is just cyclical in nature. There's some really interesting studies into repeating time cycles. There's some good reasons to believe this. You know, the moon, every month the moon goes through all the signs. The sun goes through all the signs every year. Some of them are longer. You know, Uranus takes 84 years to go around. Pluto takes almost 250 years to go through all of the zodiac signs. Even the Earth itself, through the precession of the equinoxes, goes through its own trip through the zodiac. And that takes 25,000 years to go through the whole zodiac, and it takes 2,100 years to go through a single sign. These are called ages. That's what people mean, whether they know it or not, talk about the age of Aquarius. If all of the planets are just as important as Earth is in the universe, then it would make sense that we are all experiencing these energies in, maybe not in similar ways because we all are different. I'm saying we, like us humans, are all different, so we could understand how Earth is different from other planets. There's no reason to think that Neptune isn't just as important as the Earth. Since we're all made of the same thing, you know, we're all created on the inside of stars, and then we all, you know, became flung through the universe due to supernovas. There's really no reason to think that this phenomena is human-centric, and so it really doesn't need to be something that affects humans. It's just like the clock. Another thing that people sometimes bring up is whether or not astrology is a placebo effect, and this is actually really interesting, and so I want to see if you are an average listener. You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. You have a great deal of unused potential, which you have not used to your advantage. While you have some personality weaknesses, you're generally able to compensate for them. Disciplined and self-controlled outside, you tend to be worrisome and insecure inside. At times, you have serious doubts as to whether or not you've made the right decision or done the right thing. You prefer a certain amount of change and variety and become dissatisfied when restricted. You pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept other statements without satisfactory proof. You found it unwise to be too frank in revealing yourself to others. At times, you're extroverted and social, but at others, you're wary and reserved. Some of your aspirations tend to be pretty unrealistic, and security is one of your major goals in life. So there's an 84% chance that you identified with these vague statements. I know you're all smart out there, so it's pretty obvious that these are all pretty vague, and most of them are kind of just like a basic commentary on society as a whole, like what we kind of expect good people to be like, or just like on average what we expect people to be like. In the 1940s, Bertram Forer, who was a psychologist, he was a professor, he gave his psych students a personality test. They all finished their test, and a week later he gave them the results of this test, and he asked them not to share with the rest of the class. 84% of them said that it was accurate. You know, I'm sure Bertram had a laugh about it. In the citation of his study, he admitted to using an astrology newsstand book for his statements of this personality. His conclusion was that because so many of them had answered that this was accurate, it meant that humans generally are unable to be objective enough to validate whether or not items are true or false, especially the more positive and vague they are. It was called The Fallacy of Personal Validation, a classroom demonstration of gullibility. Now, my point, is not to discredit his study, obviously. And I can't say that it isn't at play, but the thing that's different about this is that it can't really be universally applied to astrology, because anyone who's observing their own birth chart and really investigating their personality is completely aware any of the aspects could contradict any of the other aspects. In fact, you know that's likely. They are less likely to blindly accept their personality assessment because there are so many contradictions and so many other options. People investigating their birth charts are unlikely to blindly accept them because they're able to use critical thinking, and that's not something that Bertram's students were able to do. Basically, he said the results of his study had indicated that it might be dangerous for a person who is taking psychological help from therapy may not be able to validate yes or no whether something is helping them or not. Of course, this doesn't stop people from asking whether or not the Bertram Forer effect is actually affecting those who believe in astrology. Majority of the time, time they don't actually know very much about astrology. And so if anybody asks you if the Bertram 4 effect is in place, you can just tell them it's not likely. Let's look at a natal chart. I'll use my own. If you are able to, I would get your own out. Go to astro.com. If possible, make sure that you use the exact time, if you can, and the location of your birth, because some aspects change quickly. The moon can switch signs during the day. Also, the ascendant switches 12 times a day. It spends about 2 hours in each sign. So let's move on. Now on the left side, you'll see the table that shows where all of the planets were, what sign they were in, and the degree that they're at when you were born. It does also take note of the symbols. Those are the symbols that you'll see on the actual circle chart, as well as down below in the aspect triangle. I just call it an aspect key. So let's talk about the aspect key on the bottom. This wonky triangle has all the planets down the hypotenuse side, and then when you follow one planet to another, they will meet in the middle, and if those planets are making any conversations, then it will be indicated there by a shape. So the red squares are squares, the blue triangles are trines, the asterisks are sextiles, the circles with lines are conjunctions, and the circles that are connected, two circles that are connected by a line, is called an opposition. Now, when you're looking at yours, you'll probably see some other ones. I just mostly look at squares, trines, sextiles, conjunctions, and oppositions. Now, some of these are easier and some of them are more difficult. Some of them are just an acknowledgement that they're having a conversation and aren't necessarily always difficult. You know, I've read that conjunctions are difficult, but depending on the usage, I've actually had some really good luck with some conjunctions. You're going to find some conflicting information about astrology, and that's just the nature of the beast. Before we move forward and talk about the circle chart, I just want to make another note about this triangle. This is a lot of information down here. To be honest with you, I don't have my aspects memorized by any means. So just be aware when you feel like you're ready to start looking into these aspects, or if you just feel called to look at some of them, especially if you start to get really interested in a planet, maybe your ruling planet. When you're ready, you just take the planet, like if you took the top left of the triangle, that's the relationship between the sun and the moon, and if there's a shape there, then you just Google sun blank moon astrology meaning. So it's easy to see looking at this aspect key that you have so many layers of your personality. I just want to remind you not to get overwhelmed. Astrology is meant to be a fun tool for most people. I mean, it's not for everybody, it's very serious for some people, but especially when you're just beginning at it with a fun eye. Now let's move on to the big chart. This is the natal chart. It's basically a 360-degree map of the solar system at the time that you were born. So if you look at the little circle in the middle, that's kind of like the earth, and it's kind of like your mom. Well, this sounds like a bad your mom joke, but your mom is in the middle, and she, at this moment in time, she's getting ready to give birth to you. So now the basic anatomy of a natal chart is that the hemispheres are divided by ascendant and descendant, and the MC and the IC. The ascendant and the MC, or sometimes called the midheaven, is talked about a little more than the descendant or the IC, and that's usually because like they correlate, they're always opposite. For longer than I like to admit, I misunderstood what the ascendant was. A lot of astrologers will describe it as the mask that you wear. I kind of like misunderstood what that meant. I thought it was like, in order to hide something else, you wear this. And that's not quite right. Other people may argue that that is correct. I kind of like to call it like the outfit that you wear, because really the ascendant is basically who meets people. Who do people meet when they meet you? The first thing that a stranger might notice is your clothing. And so I like to think of it as your outfit. For example, mine is Capricorn rising, which means that when people first meet me, they meet my Capricorn. They may think that I'm a Capricorn based on how I portray myself. This is also how I want to be portrayed. My Taurus is definitely who they meet pretty quickly after. It takes a really long time for people to meet my Scorpio, and it takes even longer, if not maybe they never, meet my Gemini, which is my Venus. How do people portray themselves? And that's kind of what the ascendant does, is it's the clothing that people wear when they meet new people. So now each natal chart shows the location of the planets at the time that you were born. So you can see all the symbols in there. Those are all the planets. Now, an accurate time is required in order to give you an accurate house. So if you had to guess your time, or if you just chose noon, for example, or midnight, then make sure that you don't look too much into the houses, because those are probably not accurate. So let's talk about what all these different components do and how they correlate to each other. So the planets say what, the signs say how, and the house says where. Here's an example. If you have Venus in Aries in the 3rd house, then that means you love. Venus is love, so you love with fiery passion, okay? That's Aries. Very abrupt, fiery, reckless, abandoned passion, very intense. And in the 3rd house means mostly communication. So you require people, if you are a Venus Aries in the 3rd house, you show that by having a very fiery conversation with people or expecting them to be very fiery communicators with you. So let's talk about all the houses. So you see the little pie slices there on your chart. Close to the center circle, it says all the numbers 1 through 12. These are the houses. And so the 1st house represents the self. 2nd house represents finances, the senses, everything just barely outside of your body, what you value, basically, what you surround yourself with, and how you get it. The 3rd house is communication, mind, intellect, also neighbors, siblings, very close friends, and also things like broadcasting, journalism, etc. The 4th house is about the mother, the family, your origin, kind of where you come from, hometown, etc. The 5th house is about fun, romance, hobbies, creation. This is creative energy, and so this is even children. This is where fun romances are. This isn't necessarily where you would find your husband or your wife or your business partners or things like that. Important one-on-one relationships. That's not exactly what the 5th house is about. The 6th house is about health, routine, the workplace. This is your day in and day out. I don't want to call it drudgery, but it's very necessary for living as a human in our society. The 7th house is about relationships and one-on-one partnerships. It also sort of revolves around like legal. The 8th house has to do with, it's a little more mysterious. It's mysteries, taboo subjects, the occult, witchcraft all live here. Other people's resources are here. Sex, death, and rebirth. 9th house is about philosophy, religion, foreign travel. This is very much the big concepts. College level education. The 10th house is about career, legacy, life path, reputation. 11th house is about your audience, your community, congregation, friendships, especially acquaintances, things like that. And then the 12th house is about secrets, the hidden. Sometimes astrologers will say it gives you an insight of how you died in a past life. It's like your past life. Maren Altman really blew my mind when she said that this was a dangerous place where you basically weren't here, really. Your mother was giving birth to you here. The signs aren't quite as easy to describe as the houses. We're all familiar with places and environments, so that's not too difficult to describe. So now the zodiac signs are 12 different combinations, 3 energy types, and 4 elements. So now the energy types are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. The cardinal is basically the go-getter energy, the leader, the one who starts things off. The cardinal types are Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. The fixed energy takes the torch from the cardinal and really gets the project going. They have the stamina and the endurance to take this project from the beginning stage to the completion stage. Are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Now, mutable energy is adaptable and is usually able to be flexible and remain swift when things kind of go wrong or become unexpected, and those are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Now the elements are fire, earth, air, and water, and they're in every neighborhood. Even if it's scarce, it's there somewhere. Fire energy is known to be exciting, passionate, sometimes it's reckless though, and impulsive. And these are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Earth energy is known to be more grounded and practical. It's pragmatic and acutely aware of the material world. Sometimes they're stubborn, a little bit inhibited, not super spontaneous normally. Air energy is known to be associated with the mind. It uses intellect in the way that the water signs use emotion. It has a tendency to do whatever it wants, and it doesn't really care that much about tangibility, is that a word? Tangibleness, or practicality, and so those things might not be that important. Those are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Now, water energy is known to be emotional, and it's more psychically sensitive. It's typically known as nurturing, but sometimes they struggle to know where the boundaries are, and sometimes can lose themselves, especially with other water signs. These are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Each sign either leads a season, holds it down, as Maren would say, or ushers it out. So the cardinals lead, of course, the fixed hold them down, and the mutables usher the seasons out and usher the new ones in. So Aries, Cancer, and Libra, and Capricorn are all the cardinals that lead spring, summer, fall, and winter. So the combos are cardinal fire Aries, fixed earth Taurus, mutable air Gemini, cardinal water Cancer, fixed fire Leo, mutable earth Virgo, cardinal air Libra, fixed water Scorpio, mutable fire Sagittarius, cardinal earth Capricorn, fixed air Aquarius, mutable water Pisces. So now the last piece of the puzzle is we know how now, sort of, and we know where, but what is going to be happening. Basically the last piece of the puzzle. Those are the planets, and this is how they kind of get applied to your personality. So each planet kind of has its own thing. The sun is what most people are familiar with, and it's like your base layer. So that's why everybody sort of talks about that, because it's easy to generalize, because this is whether you're having a good day or a bad day. This is just like the tree trunk that all of the other planets kind of branch off of. So now just to keep this in mind, today 360,000 Sagittarius joined the planet. You know, there are already nearly countless Sagittarians that live on the planet from all the way from 1 to 100. That is a testament to how broad the sun is, but also how important it is that the planets can all attach to that one base layer. This is where you're shining. The moon rules the home, the mother, family. This is your origin and your ancestors. Also your emotions and kind of the background noise. Mercury rules the mind, the communication. So Venus does rule the senses and affection. She also rules things like love and values, as well as finances. Mars rules ambition, drive, anger, and what you fight for and how you respond to anger. To your anger, not necessarily to other people's anger, as well as sex. Jupiter rules luck and expansion. It rules over prosperity and good luck, good fortune, as well as miracles, philosophy, religion, collegiate level learning, foreign travel. Saturn rules structure and discipline, and he's seen as the builder of civilization. He is associated with limitations, fears, and our sense of responsibility. Now that we're getting to the outer planets, traditionally these planets were not known, so they did not rule any sign. Modern astrologers do use them. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all pretty generational, and so these planets, even though they signify an entire generation, they can be more interesting when you look at the house that they're in your birth chart, because that changes every 2 hours, and so it's a little more personalized when you look at the houses that these slow-moving planets are in. So I just want to kind of reiterate the complexity of a birth chart. I mean, you'll see when you look at yours that there's probably a likelihood that you have a place where there's multiple planets kind of piled up on top of each other. That's called a stellium. That location in your birth chart can be very complicated. Basically, since I have 3 planets in Capricorn, one of them is in Aquarius, but they're all in the first house, I have, and when you crisscross them all, I have over 30 aspects to analyze that give me clues to myself. And so a lot of people might just look at that and be like, oh, never mind, I don't have the time or the energy. It sounds like I'll have years in by the time I really get any value. Even just a couple bits of information about your own birth chart might be enough to really give you some insight as to why things are the way they are in your mind. There's no deadline. You can find endless amounts of information. So I did say earlier that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about like how astrology changed my life, and I don't want you to think that that was an exaggeration. It really did. There was a point in my life where I kind of expected everybody to just be like me. I started to realize, not through looking at their birth charts necessarily, I could see where my generosity comes from, and then recognize that not everybody has that kind of a placement. And so I started realizing that we're infinitely more complex than even the birth chart shows. I realized that I can't take other people's actions personally. Another thing that this is actually a very recent realization, that I don't have to be self-conscious. I can be confident in my personality. I don't have to feel bad because I attract people who can't handle, my ability to be very fiery. Like, I like to yell. I'm an Aries communicator. I like fiery, passionate debates, but I don't have to be self-conscious. People can subscribe or they can just not. That's all there is to it. There are other people with Aries Mercuries out there. I hope that they're not all being self-conscious about how much they like to yell and how much people are likely intimidated by them. To be honest, just overall generally, you don't have to be concerned. Everything is cyclical and it's all just lessons. right? Like, we have the ability to take these lessons and do with them what we will. We have the ability to turn on and off these personality traits. I don't have to yell all the time. But the biggest way that this has really changed my life is I've learned how to be a better friend. And a lot of that did come from looking at my friends and family's birth charts, but it really just made me recognize that not everybody's the same. Again, this is the same thing that I realized before. The same way that I learned that people may not be my best friends forever because they're not compatible on a regular level, the people who are compatible with me are still not exactly like me. And so I recognize that I need to see them for who they are and not who I expect them to be. And finally, I just realized that life is just a big fucking game, man. Like, it's not even something that has to be taken so seriously. I know that this is not the same for everyone. I understand that it's very much a privilege that I'm able to say that, but essentially your birth chart is just your stats of the game of life that you get to play with. And if you use the game of life, if you use your natal charts to play the game of life and you start to learn what it is that you actually want, then you can slay this game, right? Like, if you figure out how to make yourself happy, you can have a life that actually makes sense for you. If you're feeling so inclined, it would be super awesome if you like and subscribe, send it to a friend. Until next time, later, Gator.